Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Graduated Gaming. I'm Adam of Extra Levels, and this will be my very own occasional feature here on our channel. As you may recall from our trailer, or perhaps the channel's description, we here at Extra Levels are all graduate students, and I myself am studying literature. I've also enjoyed video games my whole life, though, particularly their unique ability to directly involve the player in creating the stories they tell. In recent years, I've become particularly interested in how various games go about doing just this, and so Graduated Gaming is intended to be a combination of these interests of mine. An informal but academic-minded look at not just what video games mean, but also how they create meaning. With that in mind, I'm starting this series off with a relatively recent game that seems like it got talked about a lot more than it got played. Let's have a look at how gameplay design in Spec Ops: The Line creates meaning alongside the narrative. For anyone who hasn't played Spec Ops: The Line yet, I strongly suggest that you do so. It should be pretty cheap by now, it doesn't take that long to play through, and it's available on any number of digital distribution platforms, so there's really no excuse not to buy it. Not only will this whirlwind tour of the overall game and one of its most well-crafted moments be incredibly spoiler-tastic, it's also just a game that any shooter fan, even the most casual one, owes it to themselves to play. Just don't expect it to be fun. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, this is a game that's been written about a lot, so while I haven't read everything there is to read about Spec Ops: The Line, not even close, I'm going to try not to repeat anything that I know has already been said. I'll just recommend that everybody go read up online if there's anything they're unclear on, because there's some really good stuff out there. Two commentaries on this game in particular, though, deserve mention up front. Tom Bissell's thoughts on his fairly unique experience with Spec Ops: The Line over on Grantland, and the Extra Credits two-part analysis, no relation to Extra Levels, I'm afraid. I've given a lot of thought to both, and we'll be building on some of their ideas in this video. Alright, that's all out of the way, so let's turn to the game itself. Spec Ops: The Line is a game that makes extensive use of player expectations in order to explore a number of different topics, from real-life political and military issues to the very idea of mediation in games. One of its main points, though, and the one to which I'll mostly be limiting myself in this episode, is to viciously assault the idea that there's anything realistic about modern military shooters, or even that we as players should be okay with such games. To that end, it goes to great pains early on to set the player up to expect something between Call of Duty and Gears of War, only to use those expectations to show the player how incredibly screwed up it is to find games like Call of Duty fun. Spec Ops: The Line sets up some very familiar expectations, using everything from its opening scene, to its premise, to its geographical setting, to its art design, to its use of Nolan North as the player character's voice, even to its box art. For the first hour or so, you're meant to feel like you're playing a low-budget Call of Duty knockoff that's really more ambitious than successful, and depending on how familiar you are with modern military shooters, chances are good that it will succeed mostly at fooling you. And yet, almost as soon as you start playing it, the game is undermining all those expectations every bit as carefully as it's setting them up. This dynamic is present in the game's very DNA, so to speak. By now, we expect modern military shooters to be at least partially about U.S. troops in some sandy Middle Eastern country, so especially in the very beginning, it all seems pretty par for the supposedly realistic wargame course. But Tom Bissell observes the real-world absurdity of the game's very premise, that is, U.S. involvement in Dubai in the wake of horrific sandstorms. Likewise, the Extra Credits crew points out that the gameplay is purposefully gamey, specifically intended to reinforce the building sense in the game's narrative that you don't really want to be doing any of the things it's forcing you to do. Of course, what they don't really drive home is that despite the differences in gameplay design, what your player character is being told to do would not be at all out of place in any of what are commonly called modern military shooters. The developers at Jaeger really used every tool at their disposal in this effort to both draw in and discomfort the player, too. In the art direction, enemies and behaviors, vocal performances, level design, and plot all seem completely genre standard at the outset, but quickly become distorted in extremely uncomfortable ways. It even has you start off shooting at the genre standard enemies, that is, ragtag groups of dark-skinned foreigners hostile to the U.S. military, only to replace them very quickly with active-duty U.S. military personnel for the vast majority of the game. It's important to note, too, that even though Spec Ops: The Line is calling modern military shooters out on their pretension to realism, it doesn't try to do this by being truly realistic in its representation of warfare. Indeed, it goes the other way, opting to make its 3 Delta Force soldiers versus a US battalion gameplay feel more and more unreal. How it does this is actually almost exactly what I've accused Far Cry 2 of doing in the past. It kind of paints itself in the trappings of realism while remaining stubbornly gamey. The difference is that Far Cry 2 doesn't seem to know that it's not realistic, and so it suffers from the dissonance. Spec Ops: The Line, however, is blatant about its unreality and deliberately, stubbornly follows many of the expected beats of a modern military shooter in order to condemn those games through its similarity to them rather than its difference from them. Alright. Having taken a fair chunk of time to cover the broad strokes of the game, I want to focus now on perhaps its most famous moment, the white phosphorus scene. Here, I'll play it for you. It's not that long, just, you know, spoilers.
I'd say that's the gate.
Adams, take care of the lookout.
I'm on it. Sweet dreams, bitch.
All right, Lugo, who are we up against?
An army? Give or take?
No shit.
How are we getting through this?
This might help.
Fine, set it up.
You're fucking kidding, right? That's white phosphorus.
Yeah, I know what it is.
You've seen what this shit does. You know we
Might not
can't
have a
use
choice,
it.
Lugo.
There's always a choice.
No, there's really not.
You ain't Walker. We'll fire.
Okay, prepare to fire.
That in order?
Yeah, it is.
Fine. Launching camera. Camera online. Serve.
Okay, targeting online. You ready?
Whenever you are.
Reloading.
You need to hit those RPGs!
Light them up. Reloading. RPG's neutralized. Fire! Loading mortar.
Take out those...
Loading mortar. Prepping mortar.
Take out those fucking snipers!
Light them up. Loading mortar. Snipers are done. Burn them.
Preparing to fire.
Assaulted by the Hummers!
Fire! Loading mortar. Fire! Prepping mortar.
Walker! Take out those fucking Hummers!
Loading mortar. Humvee's destroyed. What else we got?
Another Hummer! Trapped north to the trench!
Reloading. Can't find him.
More north! It's on the trench!
Target in sight. Burn him. Loading mortar. Hummer disabled. No one's moving. It's over.
He's right, Walker.
Okay. We're done. Let's get down there. Want to reach that gate before reinforcements arrive.
This was too much.
Stop talking.
What'd you just say?
Me, the smoke is toxic. Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Let's just keep moving.
God, please, help!
Walker. Come on, man.
There's nothing we can do. brought this on yourself.
We were helping.
What? Oh no.
Are those civilians?
Where'd they come from? There's no camp here.
They took him from the nest.
That hotel back at the storm wall? No, those can't be the civvies that got kidnapped. It's not possible.
Yeah, it is. That's why Gould stormed this place. He didn't want the gate.
He was trying to rescue his people. This is your fault, goddammit! Stop right there, Lugo. What it is, he wouldn't listen. Have a choice. He turned us into fucking cowards. Enough, Sergeant. No, no.
We need to keep moving.
What?
Reinforcements will be here any second. We need to keep moving.
But Walker, you're not even...
I'm gonna make these bastards pay for what they've done. Now, are you with me or not?
So this moment takes place fairly early in the game, more or less at the end of the first act, and marks the point at which any even slightly attentive player dissociates themselves pretty decisively from Captain Walker, despite remaining in control of him even through some of the game's decisions later on. A little bit more on them in a moment. There are a few details here that are particularly noteworthy, though. First, as the load screens make clear, the game is in the habit of talking directly to the player, and this scene is no different. Clearly, there is always a choice in real life, but not in games. Your choices as a player are to go along with Walker as he unleashes a horrific weapon on US soldiers and Dubai civilians, or to stop playing the game. Given the extremely linear, set-piece-centric, almost sightseeing tour-like design of modern military shooters, it's hard for me not to see this, too, as a jab at those games for blithely expecting you, the player, to be okay with, say, gunning down civilians in an airport, or torturing prisoners, or any of the other things that maybe you should have some qualms about. Even more important, though, is a twofold point contained entirely within the gameplay of the scene. You control personally the white phosphorus bombardment, and you do so through this gray and white digital feed, which reduces the targets to silhouettes and explosions to indistinct flashes. This is, of course, a touch of that up-yours Call of Duty pseudo-realism that Spec Ops The Line deals in that the display is not too dissimilar from the interface an actual soldier might actually use in such a circumstance, but also actively prevents such an obvious opportunity for spectacle from becoming one, making it exactly the kind of realistic touch that modern military shooters would very likely omit in favor of a big splashy set piece. But more than that simple FU, well, remember how in Fallout 3 you had the VATS aiming system, which could sometimes result in these gory, cinematic, slow-mo shots of your enemies getting blown to shreds, so you could just really know how awesome to feel? Well, this scene is kind of the opposite of that. You're in direct control of the bombardment, but are prevented by the stark, almost retro way in which you carry it out from being able to revel in the spectacle of the violence you're perpetrating. The whole attack is carried out through the graphical equivalent of an original Game Boy, specifically to keep you from being able to turn that moment into this enjoyably gory power fantasy. It's the anti-bullet storm, if you will. Instead, the detail and presentation panache is saved for the immediate aftermath of your attack, when you walk through this otherworldly, nightmarish destruction that you've wrought and see the partially melted soldiers crawling around in agony begging for help. It means that the visceral immediacy is reserved for the chilling consequences and not spent on the exercise of power that is the use of lethal force. In point of sickening fact, you've just done something any number of shooting-based games have featured. Used any means necessary to carve your path through overwhelming opposition. But this time, The scene of violent spectacle is rendered as a trivial job, taken care of in a kind of retro meta video game within the game. The real spectacle is of what you've wrought. And so that's where the real weight is, the agonizing and disfiguring demise of US soldiers and local non-combatants. This tactic of forcing you, even in later moments in which you are offered a decision within gameplay, to witness how destructive, or at best fruitless, your actions are, is a core part of how Spec Ops The Line drives its main point home. This is a game about killing people that's supposed to be realistic. Why in the world should we expect that to be fun, of all things? Just as the best thing Captain Walker could have done is to retreat and radio back to command instead of forging ahead and condemning everyone in Dubai to die as a result, the best thing the player can do is quit and think more carefully about what sorts of things they play in the future. Well, I only managed to cover a small fraction of what there is to discuss with Spec Ops The Line, but if nothing else, I hope you've gained some food for thought. I'll be back soon with another, hopefully less brutally depressing game to wax rhapsodic about. Until then, just remember, you can think carefully about a video game and have fun with it at the same time. Oh, just not Spec Ops The Line. If you're having fun with this game, consider seeing a therapist.
The truth, Walker, is that you're here because you wanted to feel like something you are not, a hero.